Hello, everyone. This is Jillian Liner, Director of Conservation for Audubon, New York. As Sharon mentioned, this afternoon we are going to be talking about coastal resilience, specifically how significant our coastline is in New York and Connecticut to birds and also our communities, some threats to our coasts, in particular the coasts that are there, the threats they are facing due to climate change, how natural habitats can serve as natural solutions to addressing those threats from climate change, and what Audubon and also you can do to help protect those natural habitats and make our coasts more resilient. Next slide. Our coastal resiliency work at Audubon falls within our Coast Initiative. Yeah, if you can go to perfect, thank you. And our Coast Initiative is striving to have all coastal habitats protected and healthy and resilient for the benefit of birds, other wildlife, and people. And Audubon has a long history of coastal conservation. It stems all the way back to when our organization was first established in 1905, when we were focused on addressing the serious threats that waterbirds face. And today, our coastal birds face a number of threats, and our Atlantic Flyway Coast Initiative is striving to reduce the threats to those birds and help reverse their declines their populations are facing and stabilize their populations. We've identified just over a dozen what we call flagship or highly at-risk bird species that we focus our conservation efforts on. And they're found in habitats, our coastal habitats like beaches and dunes and salt marsh and tidal flats and islands. And those species represent the habitats are found in habitats that hundreds of other additional species are found and depend on. Next slide. Some of our priority birds include species like the piping plover. New York and Connecticut coasts support almost 25% of the Atlantic coastal breeding population of the piping plover. That's a notable percentage of the population, it's a federally threatened bird. And this sweet little plover, it nests directly on our beaches. Not many people know that. Even those of you who commonly visit the beaches and our coastline might miss this little bird. They don't have a formal nest. They actually just dig a little scrape or a little cup directly on the beach, and their eggs are really well camouflaged. Next slide. New York and Connecticut's coastline also has the largest roseate tern colony in the Western Hemisphere, which is a federally endangered tern, and we have the largest common tern colony in the world, which is New York. It's a threatened bird in New York State and special concern in Connecticut, and that's located on Great Gull Island, which this image in this slide is showing some volunteers helping to mark the nest locations of terns. Next slide. We also have notable salt marsh species, so birds that are found in our tidal marshes like the salt marsh sparrow. New York and Connecticut have 12% of the breeding population of this sparrow, and it is a bird that is state listed throughout its breeding range, and it's being evaluated for listing by the federal government. Its range is really pretty restricted, and its population is small. It breeds from Virginia north to Maine, and there's only about 30,000 individuals. And to put that into some perspective with a common bird, the American robin population is estimated to be about 320 million. So it's got a small population, restricted range, and it's also experiencing significant declines, about 9% per year. And scientists are really concerned that this species population could collapse in the next 50 years. And the greatest threat to this bird is sea level rise, which is causing loss of suitable breeding conditions and also habitat. Next slide. So our incredible coastal ecosystems support, these highly at-risk birds like the ones I just mentioned, and species that are indicators of healthy, functioning ecosystems. And they're also important to the economy and recreation. For example, our salt marshes provide significant nursery grounds for recreational and commercial fisheries. Next slide. In addition, coastal wetlands, tidal marshes, beaches, reefs also reduce flood, storm, and erosion damages to communities. So these natural ecosystems are natural solutions to storm protection. NOAA estimates that coastal wetlands provide $23.2 billion in storm protection services every year. And during Hurricane Sandy, coastal wetlands saved more than $625 million in flood damages. So areas that had wetlands in front of them experienced less damage during Hurricane Sandy than areas that didn't. So we know these coastal habitats are providing incredible habitat to priority species. They provide economic benefits like improving water quality, supporting fisheries and outdoor recreation, and they're also serving as protection during storm events. And there's some other considerations when we're thinking about making our coasts more resilient for storm events and sea level rise, and considering a natural solution like one of these habitat types versus another, like some sort of infrastructure like armoring or groins or breakwaters. There's a couple other considerations that make natural infrastructure a better option, a better solution, and that's natural infrastructure has lower replacement costs than other infrastructure. They can rebound on their own following a storm event, and they can also grow and keep pace with sea level rise. Next slide. Unfortunately, these coastal habitats are experiencing a number of threats. The primary one being sea level rise, which it's estimated our coastline would experience 2 to 6 feet increase in sea level rise by 2100. It's also estimated that we will see more frequent and severe storms. 5 hurricanes have hit the Atlantic coast in just the 2017 and 2018 season, causing billions in damages. And then the coasts in New York and Connecticut are heavily developed, and people continue to move to the coast. And that contributes to habitat loss and also pollution and invasive species and habitat degradation, and also puts more people at risk. Next slide. About a year or so ago, Audubon did an analysis of the bird habitat and bird data, as well as looked at a couple of models that looked at sea level rise and also habitat integrity. And the assessment was to identify the most important places along our coast for these priority birds and our habitats and places that we should focus our coastal resiliency efforts. And this map shows places where we are currently working in green. Those are mostly shorebird sites, so beaches and islands. And the map also shows in kind of a turquoise color and purple places that came out of this assessment as being high priority and places that we should consider working in the future. So the blue sites are potential shorebird sites, and the purple ones are the salt marsh sites. Next slide. Given sea level rise projections along our coast, it is predicted that we're going to experience large losses of salt marsh habitat, and now is the time that we need to find creative solutions to conserve those habitats to help stop the declines of our priority birds, protect these habitats, and make our communities more resilient. I'm going to turn it over to Corey now to talk a little bit more about coastal resiliency and the ways that we're working to make our coastline more resilient.
Thanks, Jillian. What Jillian just said, now is the time to find creative solutions to conserve our coastal habitats, is exactly what today's topic, coastal resilience, is all about. To protect our coastal birds and communities, next slide, we need to increase the ability of our coasts to withstand storm events, rising seas, and other stressors. We also want to increase bird populations so they can withstand catastrophic events and other threats. And coastal resilience also means enhancing and restoring coastal habitats to protect communities during storm events, making it easier for communities to recover following hurricanes, coastal storms, and flooding. Next slide. There are a number of strategies that we can employ to make our coasts more resilient. First, we can protect natural resources where they currently exist. As Jillian indicated, healthy natural ecosystems such as tidal marshes, beaches, and barrier islands reduced flood, storm, and erosion damages to communities. Second, we can restore degraded habitat or manage habitats to enhance their resilience, as healthier habitats are more able to withstand threats. Audubon is particularly interested in restoring and managing high marsh, the nesting area of the salt marsh sparrow. Third, we can plan for coastal retreat by moving and closing roads that are frequently flooded and protecting marsh migration corridors. And in places without natural habitats, we can use natural infrastructure, such as living shorelines, to prevent erosion and flooding. Lastly, we can advocate for legislation that supports these efforts. Next slide. Audubon and its partners are already taking action at Stratford Point in Stratford, Connecticut, which is the top star, and at Mastic Beach in Brookhaven, New York, which is the bottom star. Next slide. At Stratford Point, site of the former Remington Gun Club, salt marsh along the North Shore was removed in 2000 to facilitate lead shot cleanup efforts. Without the salt marsh as protection, the North Shore began to erode. In 2014 to 2015, Sacred Heart University, in partnership with Corteva Agroscience, the landowner, and Audubon, Connecticut, the land manager, and with the help of many other volunteers, we were able to install 150 concrete reef balls and plant salt marsh grasses behind them. The reef balls absorb wave energy, allow for sediment to settle, and the salt marsh grasses to take hold. Based on the success of the pilot project, additional reef balls and grasses were added in 2016 to 2017, protecting nearly 800 feet of shoreline. Next slide. At Mastic Beach, Audubon is partnering with the town of Brookhaven and others to remove segments of a frequently flooded road and restore tidal marsh, improving habitat connectivity and function in an important area for salt marsh sparrow. This action will restore 1.75 acres and enhance 44.5 acres of native marsh habitat, and will also result in restored floodplain function. The project is part of a larger, ongoing, multifaceted coastal retreat and floodplain restoration effort on the 7,600 acres that make up the Mastic Beach Shirley Peninsula. Next slide. As I mentioned earlier, there are also legislative solutions that we can advocate for to increase coastal resilience. The Coastal Barrier Research Act is one example. The act, initially passed in 1982, promotes public safety, saves tax dollars, and conserves coastal resources by prohibiting federal expenditures in areas that are included in the program. The act has saved billions, has broad bipartisan support, and provides important habitat for birds and other wildlife. In 2014, the United States Fish and Wildlife Service initiated a project to remap the coastal barrier resource system units in the 9 states, including Connecticut and New York, that were impacted by Hurricane Sandy. The service proposed adding 277,000 acres to the system and removing just 1,344 acres. Audubon submitted comments in support of the proposed changes, and we'll be talking to our legislators about the importance of these changes in the year ahead. Next slide. I hope that today's webinar has inspired you to act. And as you can probably guess, we could most certainly use your help. To start, you can sign up to receive action alerts and be a voice for coastal resilience. We could also use your help this summer with planting and restoration projects, and also bird monitoring and stewardship. And lastly, please share what you've learned today with others. Remember, you are what hope looks like to a bird. Next slide.
Hi, everyone. It's Sharon again. Thank you again for joining us. We have our contact information on this final slide. We'll take questions now, but if you think of questions in the future, if you want to get in touch with Jillian or Corey directly, our email addresses are up on the screen. And in the chat box, we actually just shared a link to a video about coastal resilience, which features Stratford Point and the living shoreline that Corey just mentioned, and Corey herself, around the 8-minute mark. So again, that link was just shared in the chat box. And if you have questions, you should feel free to type them in, and we'll get to as many as we can. Oh, and actually the first question is a very good one, which I forgot to mention, which is that we are recording the webinar. It will be available on both the Connecticut and New York websites. We usually post it the next day, and you can see it linked from our homepage, but we'll also follow up with everyone who registered with helpful links after the webinar is officially over, including links to a recording, links to the coastal resilience video, and more. It seems like people were interested in the maps as well from this PowerPoint, so we'll make sure to attach those. So panelists, one of our questions is about living shorelines. Does anyone know of examples of living shoreline projects in tidal estuaries further inland, such as up the Hudson River? And of course, you know, if we can always do some research and follow up. Examples of living shoreline projects in other places.
Yeah, this is Jillian. I am not familiar with any up the Hudson, but that's not to say that there might not be some. I know there's a lot of resiliency work, the Hudson River Estuary Program, and I believe Cornell are working with some communities on some projects, and it's possible that there might be. There are other examples in the New York, Connecticut area. I do think the Stratford Point one is a really interesting one, and as Corey said, I think there was another question in the chat box about are we suggesting that we would create a marsh or a wetland rather than, you know, a hardened, like a seawall. And in fact, in some places, obviously, the decision of what is the most appropriate or what would actually be effective and sustainable really depends on the site. But I think that Stratford Point is a good example that because of erosion, there could have been a choice there to build a seawall or do some, you know, a hardened shoreline of some sort. But instead, they did the living shoreline. They did these reef balls in order to minimize wave action and energy and allow the salt marsh behind it to build up and grow. And so I think that is one example. And yeah, it depends on the site, but that is essentially what we'd like to see are the natural solutions, areas that provide not only storm protection, but also, you know, natural habitat and these other benefits that I touched on in some of my slides.
Thanks, Jillian. We've got a couple questions about getting involved, so I'll just sort of group them all together. People are wondering what, if any, existing opportunities are available to volunteer, both with restoration efforts and also with beach stewardship training. And I know there are different opportunities in each state. So maybe Corey, you could speak first to Connecticut and then Jillian to New York. And obviously if there's overlap, feel free.
Sounds good. So Corey here. We are definitely looking for people to help with beach nesting bird stewardship this coming season. We're going to be having 2 volunteer trainings. One is going to be on March 14th at Stratford Point in Stratford, Connecticut. And the training for new volunteers will be from 10:30 to noon. And then we're also going to have another training on the eastern side of the state of Connecticut, and that date is to be determined. Also, if you're interested in helping with restoration efforts, we do typically have an Earth Day event at Stratford Point where we're looking for people to come down to the point to potentially help plant some more native plants, help remove some invasives and other projects on site. I'll turn it over to Jillian.
Yep. In New York, specifically Long Island, we do have opportunities to get involved in the beach stewardship work and also other volunteer stewardship activities. We will have some related to planting and restoring marsh habitat, but also we have volunteer days that help install string fencing around beach nesting bird sites, help pick up trash. We actually have a volunteer event in the spring where we build tern chick shelters. So I mentioned the significant nesting colonies out on Great Gull Island, and we have a volunteer day where we help construct those with volunteers, and then we bring them out to Great Gull Island for the breeding season. So the best way to learn about those, they haven't all been scheduled yet, would be to email the contact information on the screen and, just put a note in that you're interested in the New York coastal volunteer opportunities, and then we can add you to the list and you'll get notified about when those happen. I noticed there was, Sharon, if I saw, or I think it was you mentioned, there was a question also about the maps. I think those might have been the priority site maps that I showed. If you're interested in learning more about that process, or there might have been a question also about modeling, if you're interested in more about that process and then those maps, also just reach out to me. They're not available online yet. I don't think they are, the actual maps are, but we can share them. We're happy to share them. The data sets that went into them, modeling results came from the Atlantic Coast Joint Venture Salt Marsh Sparrow prioritization. So that was specifically looking at habitat and presence of the salt marsh sparrow. Also the North Atlantic University of Massachusetts landscape capability model that looked at habitat integrity. And then the Nature Conservancy's coastal resilience model also was used to look at coastal resilience and associated marsh migration space.
Thanks, Jillian. And to sort of circle back, though, to the types of actions people can take, the opportunities to get involved, we had a question about what can be done at a municipal level to encourage action at the local but town or city level. Does anyone have recommendations on that?
Well, I think that there's a lot of actions, a town can take. Some of the towns in Connecticut are doing things like helping us to employ high school students as beach nesting bird stewards. They are helping with sort of string fencing setup. They're helping us sort of recruit volunteers for, the beach nesting bird season. Helping to put up signage in parking areas near beaches about beach nesting birds, helping to restore habitat. So towns can definitely take action. And I think that it's kind of up to the town to sort of figure out what's maybe working with Audubon. We're glad to help figure out what are the best ways for a town to take action.
And as far as where this work could be done, or to speak a little bit more about the maps that we showed, we're getting a couple questions about locations. So someone wondering if Westchester has been studied, shorelines in the Bronx, Marine Park in Brooklyn, areas in Staten Island, the broader scope?
The scope of the prioritization did go up the Hudson a little bit. I don't know if it got cut off in the map that I showed, but actually it did go up the Hudson. It included some of the watersheds that were just immediately north of it. Again, I think probably the easiest way, because I realized the map that we showed was pretty coarse, especially coming across with the webinar, is to get in touch with us and we can show you those sites to be able to look at it. I will say, regardless of whether your particular site or area was identified as one of those priority places, if your town or where you live supports these habitats or these species, there's probably opportunities to get involved. Always when it comes to any of the federal listed birds, those are monitored and stewarded by the land managers. Often it could be a municipality or the state agency, state park, and there are ways to get involved and help. So I wouldn't limit our prioritization. It's I think we use it and we want to get more people involved. We want to better understand what's going on at those sites and the ways that we can help. But if you don't happen to fall into one of those areas, don't feel limited by it. There's likely opportunities nearby. There's also other ways to get involved, like the action alerts, which I think was mentioned. If you want to be made aware of certain policies or things that are taking place at the state level, either in Connecticut or New York, or the federal level that can benefit our coasts, you can sign up for action alerts and be notified and help in that way too.
Thanks, Jillian. I just realized that the New York email address is unfortunately wrong on this slide, and apologies for that. It's audubonny@audubon.org. So we will have to fix that. But if you emailed us already and it bounced back, it's because the email address is, again, audubonny@audubon.org, and Connecticut is what you see on the screen. Now, we got a couple questions about those giant reef balls at Stratford Point and how they work. Corey, could you explain a bit more about where the reef ball idea came from and how those actually function?
Sure. So the idea of reef balls are actually something that has been used in the Caribbean to sort of protect shorelines from hurricanes. And Stratford Point, the living shoreline here, is actually the first sort of time that reef balls have been used in New England. And they weren't used here originally because the thought was that being made out of concrete, exposed to a wide range of temperatures from 60s, 70s on a hot summer day, to below freezing during the wintertime. The thought was that they wouldn't be able to stand up to those conditions. But the company that makes the reef balls, they're made out of concrete, but with lots of little seashells and things sort of mixed in to the concrete as well. They adjusted their formula, and so far I think we have about 400 reef balls out there. 2 or 3 of the original ones have started to sort of break down, which is anticipated. The hope is that by the time the reef balls have started to really break down, which might probably more like 20 or 30 years from now, the salt marsh that's behind the reef balls will be really well established, and that will fulfill that role of sort of protecting the coastline from erosion. But they are made of concrete. They're pretty heavy. They have holes in them so that wildlife can go in and out of them and sort of use them as protection. And if you take a closer look at them, they are actually completely encrusted with invertebrates. So lots of little mussels and barnacles and snails. So they are kind of they kind of act a little bit like an oyster reef. So that's basically the way they work is when you have waves crashing on the shore, the waves are hitting the reef balls and absorbing that energy. And then also any sediment that's being carried by those waves just kind of drops down either directly in front of or directly behind the reef ball. So it actually allows for the sediment to build up, and that sort of helps with the growth of the salt marsh grasses that we've planted behind them.
All right, thanks, Corey. Jillian, can you speak a little bit about the work that we are doing along the Great Lakes? A little bit about our water initiative out there. We have a couple people asking.
Sure. Our work along the Great Lakes, yeah, that's coastline too, and we care about it. It actually supports, for those of you who don't know, piping plover did return to the shore of New York about 30 years ago. We've had a pair nesting on eastern Lake Ontario, and we have significant wetland and beach dune habitat along Lake Ontario. We are active both on the policy front, ensuring that we have adequate funding and policies in place to maintain those habitats, but we also are working on the ground with partners and Audubon chapters to enhance and restore wetland habitat. We have a project, just as an example, in the Braddock Bay area with the Genesee Valley Audubon Society and our Great Lakes office and Ducks Unlimited and Brockport, enhancing a wetland out there that's a monoculture of cattail. So we're creating some channeling and potholing to improve the habitat.
Thanks, Jillian. We had a question about whether you can share the links that we're putting in the chat. You definitely can, whether you want to share them on social media or really anywhere. And again, we're not going to be able to get to all of the questions today, but we have a record of all of the questions. So in our follow-up email, we'll be sure to add as many links as we can, and you know, links to the recording, links to maps, links to our national water strategy, our state-based water strategies, our coastal resilience strategies, all of it. So you will be receiving a follow-up email from us. And I am just continuing to scroll through the questions because there are a lot of good ones. Opportunities for people to, for people who are connected to schools. So either students or teachers. I know that we spoke about greater volunteer opportunities at a school level.
I think that the best thing there would be to reach out to one of our centers. So in Connecticut, we have the Sharon Audubon Center in Sharon, Connecticut, the Bent of the River Audubon Center in Southbury, Connecticut, and the Greenwich Audubon Center in Greenwich. And then out on Long Island, there's the Theodore Roosevelt Center. And I think all four of those locations, as well as the Constitution Marsh Center, which is just on the Hudson, all five of those locations are able to provide great resources for educators and students.
Yeah, and I'll add to what Corey said that we have a couple programs. One is our For the Birds program, which is an education program that goes into schools. We have staff that work with volunteers to help bring that into the classroom. And our Theodore Roosevelt Center staff works in schools. They have a shorebird specific program, and then they work with the schools. And it's actually not only, they do it in schools through For the Birds, and then they also work with other school groups like Girl Scouts and such to develop signs that are incredibly adorable and also effective at communicating share the shore messages, so people, you know, respect the beach and share them. And a number of our chapters in New York City, our New York City Audubon chapter, and then our also Long Island chapters help with that program. So that's a great opportunity that teachers, if they're interested, could do it, could connect with the chapters or our staff and learn more about the program and work with students. And then Corey, I don't know if you want to talk about wildlife guards, but that's an opportunity for older high school students.
Sure. I do want to just mention we definitely would love to, if there's any teachers on here in Connecticut, you know, who have students that would be interested in making signs about migratory shorebirds and sort of the factors, the threats that they face when they're coming through Connecticut. We are looking to work with some students to make some signs this year. And then the Wildlife Guards program is a program that takes place in Bridgeport, Connecticut and West Haven, Connecticut, that educates, mentors, and employs local high school students for 7 weeks each summer to be our beach nesting bird stewards at the Sandy Point Beach and Bird Sanctuary and at Pleasure Beach. So it's a program that's been going on since 2012 at this point, and we've had 60 students that have participated over the years. And some students, get in a summer sort of getting some experience in conservation. They might go off to become writers or communication specialists or teachers, but they get this sort of experience that they take with them. They realize that they can sort of make a difference in their communities when it comes to protecting the environment. And then some students actually do go on to pursue careers in wildlife biology. So it's a great opportunity that we have to let young people really make a difference in their communities.
Thanks, Corey. And I'm sorry, I can't remember if you mentioned it while you were talking about Stratford Point, but there's the obvious connection with Sacred Heart University there and those professors and students, which literally helped build that entire living shoreline.
Yep, absolutely. There's definitely students from Sacred Heart University who are on site every summer getting firsthand experience in habitat restoration.
And we had a question about bird populations and fish, and whether research is being done correlating bird populations with fish, how forage fish and therefore birds might be impacted by our changing climate.
Well, we're not necessarily doing that research. At least Audubon isn't here in Connecticut and New York, but Audubon Seabird Institute is doing that sort of work. They are looking at how fluctuations in forage fish populations impact seabirds like the Atlantic puffin. Definitely the science shows that there is an impact. So a lot of forage fish species are changing their range because of climate change. So fish, they're in a fluid environment. They can move pretty quickly. If there are areas that are warmer temperatures or cooler temperatures, or they're moving as a result of salinity changes, they can shift around. And then their numbers, a lot of those forage fish, some of those forage fish species are managed under what's called the Magnuson-Stevenson Act, but then there are other species that are unmanaged. Management basically, is kind of having catch limits for certain species. So, some of the species are declining. The forage fish are like the bottom of the food chain in the ocean for seabirds, for marine mammals, for commercial and recreational fish species. So if you have, drops in the number of forage fish available, that's going to have an ecosystem-wide impact.
And I'll mention and put a plug for the support for the Forage Fish Conservation Act, which was a priority for Audubon. Some of you might have been notified about it or aware of it just if you receive our communications, but it was expanding protections for forage fish. So that was one way that we were working to try to address that need.
Thank you, Corey and Jillian. I think that we couldn't cover every single question, but again, we'll do our best to reply either individually or in our full email recap to folks. If you are looking for additional opportunities to get involved, there are chapters, Audubon chapters working around both states. And we can share a link in the chat right now for how to find a local state office or Audubon chapter that will come to you in about 30 seconds. So, if you're wondering how to get involved in the Hudson Valley, on Staten Island, in New Jersey, in Florida, it seems everyone is on this webinar from all places. We're going to share a link momentarily that will help you find an Audubon with which to get involved. Again, you can always email us, ct@audubon.org. Corey Folsom O'Keefe is our Director of Bird Conservation for Audubon, Connecticut. You can email audubonny@audubon.org and get in touch with Jillian Leiner, New York Director of Conservation. And we are, again, hosting these webinars regularly about all different topics related to birds and the places that they need. Every third Wednesday of the month at 4 p.m. And we'll be sending out next series of emails soon inviting you to our next webinar. So look out for a follow-up email from us. Feel free to get in touch yourselves, and thank you to everyone once again for joining, and thanks to Jillian and Corey for a great presentation.
Thank you.